She arrived at the restaurant just before the evening rush, tying her hair back quickly and adjusting her apron. The smell of fresh coffee, polished wood, and a faint hint of fried food filled the air. She took a deep breath, preparing herself for another long night. She had worked there for over a year, and though the job never felt glamorous, it paid the bills and kept her moving forward. The first customers were already seated near the windows, looking over the menu as if they were at a fancy restaurant rather than the small neighborhood place it really was. She moved to the first table, smiling politely. "Good evening. What can I get for you?" she asked. Her voice was calm, friendly, though her mind was already spinning, remembering which tables needed refill, which customers were the hardest to please, and which ones would complain no matter what she did. The man at the table, in a crisp suit, barely looked up from his phone. "Just water," he said, not even making eye contact, nodded and moved to the next table, where a couple was already arguing quietly about their orders. Every night was a balancing act. She carried trays carefully, weaving between tables and avoiding collisions with other staff. Plates clinked, glasses rattled, and voices rose in a soft, constant hum. Some customers were polite, tipping generously and offering a smile. Others were impatient, tapping fingers on the table or sighing loudly when she was just a second too slow. She had learned to ignore the frustration and focus on what she could control: a steady hand, a calm voice, and a smile that didn't falter as she moved through the crowded space. She caught glimpses of the old piano in the corner. It had been there for as long as she could remember, its wood scratched and worn, its keys yellowed with age. No one ever played it. Sometimes she would pause for a moment, just looking at it, imagining the songs it could produce. But she never touched it. Not here. Not yet. It was a quiet dream tucked behind the rhythm of her busy life, a secret she carried in her heart. The restaurant grew louder as more people arrived. Children laughed, couples chatted, and the occasional clatter of a dropped fork added to the symphony of the evening. She moved from table to table, taking orders, delivering food, and clearing plates. Her legs ached, her back ached, but she kept going. Every now and then she would glance at the piano, imagining her fingers dancing across the keys. She remembered lessons from years ago when music was her life, before responsibilities and bills had pushed it aside. A group of young adults came in, noisy and full of energy. They sat at the corner table near the piano. One of them noticed the instrument and laughed. "Does anyone here even know how to play that old thing?" he said, smirking. The group chuckled, and she felt a familiar twinge in her chest. She had played in front of small audiences before, but here, in the middle of a restaurant, it felt impossible. She smiled at the group politely, took their orders, and walked away, her heart a little heavier. The manager called her over to check on the floor. "Tables 3 and 4 are waiting. Make sure they get their orders quickly," he said. She nodded and rushed to the tables, her mind running through every task she had to complete. The rhythm of the restaurant was relentless, and there was no room for hesitation. She moved like a well-oiled machine, carrying trays of food, refilling drinks, and making sure the customers had everything they needed. Despite the chaos, there was a calm part of her that stayed centered. She noticed the little things: the way the candlelight reflected off a glass, the soft hum of conversation, the subtle clinking of silverware. These small moments reminded her why she loved life, even in the busiest, most mundane jobs. Music had taught her to notice these details, to listen to the world in a way that others often ignored. She carried that awareness with her, even while carrying trays and taking orders. By the middle of the night, the restaurant had quieted down. Most of the customers had left, leaving only a few lingering at their tables. She wiped down surfaces, collected menus, and straightened chairs. The hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of traffic outside filled the space. For the first time that evening, she allowed herself to pause near the piano. Her fingers hovered above the keys, hesitant. She could almost hear the notes in her mind, soft and warm, carrying memories of practice sessions, lessons, and quiet afternoons spent lost in music. She leaned against the piano, resting her hand on the keys. No sound came, but it felt familiar, comforting. The restaurant had been her world for so long, a place where she was seen as nothing more than a server, yet this piano reminded her of who she truly was. She pressed a key lightly, and the faint sound filled the quiet space. Her eyes closed, and for a moment, the restaurant faded away. It was just her and the music. A reminder that even in the busiest, most ordinary places, beauty could exist. A coworker walked by, breaking her reverie. "Hey, the kitchen needs help," he said, not noticing her wistful glance at the piano. She nodded and moved away, slipping back into the rhythm of her job. The magic of the piano lingered in her mind, a quiet promise that something more awaited her, even if she didn't yet know how or when. The night continued, and she finished her shift with a mix of exhaustion and quiet satisfaction. She had served countless drinks, delivered countless meals, and navigated the chaos with patience and grace. As she hung up her apron and stepped out into the cool night air, she thought about the piano again. One day, she told herself, she would sit at those keys and let the music flow. For now, though, she walked home through the empty streets, carrying the rhythm of the restaurant and the melody in her heart, knowing that her story was just beginning. Even before sunrise, she was awake, preparing for another day at the restaurant. Her small apartment smelled faintly of coffee and toast as she got ready. The streets outside were quiet, a soft mist hanging in the air. She walked to the bus stop, her bag slung over her shoulder, thinking about the shift ahead. Serving tables, remembering orders, keeping a smile on her face, all the tasks she performed so naturally now. But behind her calm exterior, memories of music and lessons from her past lingered, whispering like a song she couldn't forget. She had once dreamed of a life filled with music. Piano lessons had been her world, every day consumed by scales, arpeggios, and melodies that seemed to flow directly from her heart. She remembered her teacher's kind words, the pride she felt. When she played a difficult piece correctly, in the small competitions she had won, music had been freedom. It had been joy. But life had other plans. Her family had faced hard times. Bills, responsibilities, and the need to support herself forced her into jobs that kept her away from her dreams. The piano, once her constant companion, had been left behind, gathering dust in corners of her life, silent but not forgotten. Walking into the restaurant that morning, she tried to shake off the weight of yesterday's rush. She tied her apron, smoothed her hair, and greeted the few early customers with practiced warmth. The smell of coffee and baked goods filled the air, and she moved like she had done 1,000 times before. She remembered the way music had taught her to notice details: the tilt of a glass, the angle of a chair, the expressions on people's faces, and applied that to her work. Each table, each customer, each order was a small performance, and she executed it with care. As the day went on, a few coworkers teased her gently about her quiet nature. They didn't know about her past, about the hours spent at the piano before work, or the small recitals she had played in high school. They only saw the calm, competent server who moved quickly between tables and handled complaints without a flinch. She laughed along with their jokes, hiding the deeper part of herself, the part that longed for music. It was easier this way. It's easier to be invisible, easier to keep the world from expecting too much. During a short break, she sat alone in the empty dining area, her hands brushing the worn edges of the piano. The keys were cold and rough under her fingers, but the memory of music warmed her from within. She pressed a key softly, and though the note was faint, it felt alive. She imagined entire songs playing, imagined the emotion flowing through her hands, imagined the audience listening intently. These moments were private, stolen minutes that nourished her soul. No one would ever know, and that was enough. Her mind wandered to old competitions, the small stages where she had played confidently, her fingers dancing across the keys while her heart raced with excitement. She remembered the applause, the smiles of her teacher, and the pride in her parents' eyes. Life had moved her away from that, but the memory was alive, and every time she touched a key, it reminded her that she was capable of more than serving drinks and clearing plates. The lunch rush began, and the restaurant filled with the clatter of dishes and the hum of conversations. She moved from table to table with the precision of someone who had spent years learning rhythm, Not just music, but life itself. Each step was measured, each movement deliberate. She noticed the small details that made her job easier, which customers preferred their drinks refilled quickly, which tables needed extra attention, which orders often got mixed up. It was an orchestra of chaos, and she conducted it silently, gracefully, without drawing attention to herself. A young boy at one table looked up at her with wide eyes. "Are you a piano player?" he asked unexpectedly. She paused, surprised, and smiled gently. "I used to play a little," she said softly. The boy's eyes lit up. "I wish I could play," he said, beaming. She nodded, her heart warmed by his excitement. "You can," she replied. "You just have to practice and believe in yourself." It was a small moment, but it reminded her why music had been important, why it had mattered, and why she had never truly let it go. The afternoon passed in a blur. Orders were taken, food delivered, drinks refilled, and complaints handled with patience. She worked tirelessly, but her mind often drifted back to the piano, imagining melodies, harmonies, and rhythms that only she could hear. She dreamed of one day returning to it fully, of reclaiming the passion she had once carried so naturally. These dreams were private, fragile, but they kept her moving, kept her believing that her life was more than just a series of shifts and tips. A coworker accidentally dropped a tray nearby, startling her. The clatter of dishes broke her reverie, and she laughed softly at the interruption. Life in the restaurant was unpredictable, sometimes messy, sometimes frustrating, but it was also full of small joys. A smile from a satisfied customer, a quick thank you. The quiet rhythm of a smooth service-all, these things grounded her, kept her connected to the world even when her heart longed for music. Later in the day, a regular customer noticed her glancing at the piano. "You ever play that thing?" he asked casually. She smiled, hesitated, and then shook her head. "Not here," she said quietly. He nodded, satisfied with the answer, and returned to his conversation. But the moment lingered. The piano called to her in a way no one else could understand. A silent invitation to remember who she really was. Beneath the apron, beneath the plates and glasses, beneath the routine as the evening approached. She felt the familiar mix of exhaustion and anticipation. Another rush was coming, another wave of orders and customers. She tied her apron tightly, adjusted her hair, and moved confidently among the tables. The piano remained in the corner waiting, silent but present. She imagined herself sitting there one day, playing with abandon, and felt a thrill she hadn't felt in years. The night ended as it often did, with her cleaning up the tables, collecting menus and straightening chairs. The restaurant was quiet now, almost peaceful. She lingered for a moment near the piano, her fingers brushing the keys lightly. She imagined the music she could play, the stories she could tell through sound. For a brief instant, she allowed herself to dream fully, to remember that music was still a part of her life, even if it was hidden beneath the weight of responsibilities. Walking home through the empty streets, she carried the rhythm of the restaurant and the melody in her heart. She thought about the boy's eyes, about the soft keys of the piano, about the joy she had once felt and could feel again. Life had been hard, and dreams had been postponed, but they were not gone. One day, she told herself, she would reclaim the music, and until that day came, she would carry it quietly within her, a hidden flame that no one could extinguish. The restaurant was unusually quiet that evening. Most of the usual customers had chosen to eat elsewhere, leaving only a few scattered tables. She moved slowly, taking in the calm atmosphere, grateful for a brief pause between the rushes that usually filled the space. She carried a tray of drinks to a table by the window, the soft clink of glasses echoing lightly in the empty dining area. The familiar rhythm of her steps felt soothing, a gentle beat that reminded her of the music she loved but had set aside. One table caught her attention more than usual. A small group of people sat near the piano in the corner, laughing and chatting casually. One of them, a man with a playful smirk, pointed at the old instrument and said, "I wonder if anyone here can actually play that thing." His friends laughed, leaning back in their chairs. She walked past them, her apron brushing lightly against her clothes, her fingers brushing the edges of the tray as if testing her courage. The comment was light-hearted, but it struck something deep within her. The piano was more than a piece of furniture, it was a part of her, connection to a dream she had almost forgotten. She served their drinks politely, keeping her expression calm while her mind raced. Could she do it? Could she sit at the piano, here in front of people, and play? Her hands trembled slightly at the thought. She had not performed in front of strangers in years. The fear of judgment, of failure, was strong. But the call of the piano was stronger, quiet insistence that she could no longer ignore. As the evening wore on, she found herself near the piano again. Her co-workers were busy with other tables. The kitchen was full of noise. And for a fleeting moment, the space around her felt suspended, as if the restaurant itself had paused. She reached for the keys, her fingers brushing lightly against them, feeling the familiar texture beneath her touch. Her heart pounded with anticipation and anxiety. She closed her eyes and allowed herself a brief memory of the music she had played, the notes flowing effortlessly in her mind. A customer noticed her lingering and asked, "Are you going to play?" She opened her eyes, surprised, and shook her head. "Maybe another time," she said softly, returning to her tasks. But the seed had been planted. The idea that she could actually play for someone right here in the restaurant would not leave her. The evening stretched on, and the thought of the piano haunted her in a comforting way, a reminder that she was capable of something more. During a short break, she went into the back room, her hands still tingling from the thought of the piano. She leaned against the counter, taking deep breaths to steady herself. Life had always required her to be practical, to make choices that kept her safe and responsible. Music had been a luxury she could no longer afford. But this moment felt different. The quiet of the restaurant, the small audience near the piano, the rhythm of her own heart all aligned in a way that felt like opportunity. She returned to the dining area, determined to finish the shift. The small group near the piano had grown slightly louder, laughing and joking. Their attention was not on her, but she felt it keenly. She carried drinks and cleared tables, each movement precise, each smile genuine. And yet, her thoughts kept returning to the piano, imagining the first note, imagining the melody that might emerge, imagining the moment when she would finally let the music speak. The manager came over. Noticing her frequent glances at the piano, "Everything okay?" he asked, eyebrow raised. She nodded quickly. "Yes, just checking the floor," she replied. Hoping he would not see the conflict in her eyes, the battle between caution and desire, he returned to his own tasks, unaware that she was considering something bold. Something she had never done before in her life. A lull came in the restaurant. Most tables were empty now, leaving a few scattered customers quietly enjoying their meals. The small group near the piano had gone, leaving the instrument alone in the corner. She approached it slowly, her heart hammering. She took a deep breath, reminding herself of the years she had spent practicing, of the hours she had dedicated to music when she had no other distractions. This was her chance, her moment. If not now, perhaps never. She removed her apron, folded it neatly, and set it aside. Her hands hovered above the keys, trembling slightly but steadying with each breath. She pressed a key lightly, testing the sound, feeling the vibration beneath her fingers. The note rang clear and strong, filling the quiet space with a soft resonance. Her confidence grew, and she began to play, starting with a simple melody she knew well. The notes flowed smoothly, each one connecting naturally to the next, her fingers moving with practiced precision. At first, she played softly, unsure of how the sound would be received. But soon, the music grew bolder, richer, more expressive. She could feel the emotion behind each note, the story she had carried in her heart for years. The restaurant, once filled with ordinary noises, became a stage for her music. Every clink of dishes, every hum of conversation faded, leaving only the piano and her. The music seemed to rise, filling the corners of the room with warmth and beauty, transforming the familiar space into something extraordinary. She lost herself in the melody. Her eyes closed, her body moving slightly with the rhythm. Memories of past performances mingled with the present, and for the first time in years, she felt completely alive. The piano was no longer just an object in the corner. It was an extension of herself, a voice she had almost forgotten. Every note was a message, every chord a declaration. She had been serving drinks one moment, and now, in the same room, she was creating music that could touch hearts. A few late customers paused to listen, their eyes widening in surprise. Some whispered to each other, astonished by the skill and emotion in her playing. She remained focused, not seeking attention, but aware that people were noticing. The music carried a quiet power, a reminder that talent and passion cannot remain hidden forever. Even in the most ordinary places, extraordinary things can happen. She continued for several minutes, her hands moving with confidence, her mind entirely in the music. The restaurant had become a sanctuary, a space where her past and present merged. Each note was a small triumph, a reclaiming of a part of herself that she had nearly abandoned. When she finally played the last chord, the sound lingered in the air, a delicate echo of what had just occurred. She opened her eyes slowly, heart racing, unsure of what would come next. For a moment, silence filled the room. Then, a few quiet claps began, growing steadily as more people joined in. The customers who had remained were applauding, some with tears in their eyes, some with wide smiles of admiration. Her co-workers, who had been busy in the kitchen, peeked out and watched in awe. The manager, standing nearby, looked astonished, speechless for once. She felt a mix of relief and exhilaration, realizing that she had done what she had almost thought impossible. The piano had spoken, and through it, she had spoken too. The applause continued, warm and genuine, filling her with a sense of accomplishment she had not felt in years. She smiled, a soft, shy smile, acknowledging the moment without arrogance. The music had been hers, shared with the world in a way that was powerful yet humble. She had served drinks, cleared tables, and navigated the chaos of the restaurant all her life. But this was different. This was a moment where her true self emerged, where her hidden talent shone brightly and could no longer be ignored. As the restaurant settled into quiet again, she sat back at the piano for a moment, letting her fingers rest lightly on the keys. The echo of the music lingered, a gentle reminder that the ordinary moments of life can suddenly become extraordinary. She realized that courage and patience, long cultivated through her work and life experiences, had led her to this moment. It was a beginning, not an end, and she felt a quiet excitement for what might come next. The piano had waited patiently, and now so had she. Ready to embrace the possibilities it promised, the restaurant felt different after that night. Word had spread quietly among the staff and some of the regular customers about the server, who could play the piano with such emotion and skill. She walked in the next day feeling a mix of nervousness and excitement. The apron felt heavier somehow, not because of the fabric, but because of the new expectations and curious glances she sensed from coworkers. Some looked at her with admiration, others with quiet surprise, but she carried herself as usual, keeping her focus on the floor, taking orders, serving drinks, and making sure every table was attended to with care. As the evening approached, the usual crowd began to gather. People who had been there before came in with warm smiles, remembering the music from the night prior. There were new faces too, people who had heard about her piano performance and wanted to witness it. She felt her heart beat faster as she moved through the tables, delivering meals and drinks with calm efficiency, though her mind kept drifting toward the piano. She could hear it in her thoughts, each note calling her back, reminding her that music had always been a part of her. During a quiet moment, she found herself near the piano again. The room had a soft golden light from the evening sun filtering through the windows. Dust motes floated lazily in the air, catching the light, and for a moment the world felt suspended. She touched the keys lightly, feeling the familiar texture and coldness under her fingers. Memories of her past lessons, her teacher's encouraging words, and the joy of playing in front of small audiences all flooded back. She closed her eyes, letting the sensations guide her. Music had been her refuge, her secret world. And now it was waiting for her to embrace it fully. A small boy entered the restaurant with his mother. He ran past tables, his eyes wide as he saw the piano in the corner. He stopped, staring at it, then looked up at her. "Are you going to play again?" he asked innocently. She smiled, kneeling slightly to meet his gaze. Maybe soon, she said softly, hoping to inspire him the way music had inspired her all those years ago. He nodded, satisfied, and returned to his seat. But the brief interaction filled her with warmth and a sense of purpose. She realized that music could touch lives in ways that serving drinks never could. The evening grew busier, and she moved efficiently between tables, taking orders and attending to customers. Yet every few moments, her eyes drifted to the piano. She imagined melodies flowing from her fingers, imagined the expressions of those who would listen, imagined the joy and emotion that could fill the room. Her coworkers noticed her glances, curious but respectful. Sensing that she carried a secret energy within her that went beyond her everyday tasks, a group of regulars approached. Noticing her lingering near the piano, "Are you going to play tonight?" one asked, teasing lightly. She laughed softly, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "We'll see," she replied. Their laughter and gentle encouragement gave her a small push of confidence, though the nerves remained. She was aware of the risk, the possibility of making a mistake. But the desire to express herself through music was stronger than any fear. As the restaurant settled into a lull, she finally approached the piano. Her hands hovered over the keys, trembling slightly with anticipation. She took a deep breath, letting her fingers relax and find their natural position. The first note rang out clearly, a soft, deliberate sound that filled the space. She began to play, starting slowly, allowing the music to build gradually, each note flowing naturally into the next. Her fingers moved with precision and grace, her body swaying slightly with the rhythm. Fully immersed in the moment, customers who had been quietly eating paused, turning their attention to the music. The melody was gentle at first, but it grew in depth and emotion, telling a story without words. She could feel the room responding, the subtle shifts in atmosphere as people leaned forward, eyes widening, expressions softening. The music was no longer just a personal memory. It was a shared experience, a bridge connecting her world to those around her. Each note carried emotion, each chord expressed longing, hope, and joy. The full spectrum of human feeling she had bottled up for years. The restaurant seemed to disappear around her. She was no longer just a server. She was a storyteller, a conduit for something universal. She remembered her past, the competitions, the recitals, the long hours of practice, and realized that everything had led her to this very moment. Music had been waiting patiently for her return, and now she was answering its call. The emotion in her playing was raw and real, touching everyone present in subtle but undeniable ways. A few coworkers watched from the sidelines, mouths slightly open, eyes wide. They had seen her in the restaurant countless times, efficient and polite, but this was a revelation. They were witnessing a hidden talent, a depth of character and skill they had never imagined. The manager, standing near the back, looked on with a mixture of pride and amazement. The server they had taken for granted was displaying an artistry that transcended the mundane, showing them all the power of passion and dedication. The melody grew more complex, moving through highs and lows, soft passages and dramatic flourishes. She felt the music flowing from her heart, not just her hands. The piano was an extension of herself, a voice she had kept silent for too long. Each note seemed to resonate with the listeners, pulling them into the story she was telling. The young boy from earlier listened intently, his eyes shining, and she caught his mother's glance, a look of surprise and delight. The impact of her playing was immediate and profound, touching lives in ways she had longed for but never anticipated. Minutes passed like seconds, and finally she brought the music to a gentle close. The last chord lingered in the air, a delicate echo of the journey she had just shared. The restaurant remained silent for a brief moment, the weight of what had happened settling over everyone present. Then, slowly, applause began. It started as a few soft claps, then grew, filling the room with warmth and appreciation. Customers who had been quiet smiled broadly, some whispering words of admiration, some with tears in their eyes. Her coworkers joined in, their applause genuine and heartfelt, and the manager stepped forward, clearly moved. She rose from the piano, her hands resting lightly on the keys. She felt a mixture of relief, joy, and exhilaration. The room had witnessed her passion, her talent, her courage, and she had not faltered. The music had spoken for her when words were not enough, and in that moment, she understood the true power of her gift. It was no longer hidden, no longer silent. It was alive, vibrant, and undeniable. As the restaurant returned to its usual rhythm, she returned to her apron and resumed her duties. But something fundamental had shifted. She carried herself with a quiet confidence, a newfound awareness that her life contained more than the ordinary tasks she performed daily. The piano had opened a door, and she had stepped through it. She was a server, yes, but she was also an artist, a musician, a storyteller. And for the first time in a long time, she felt wholly herself, ready to embrace whatever came next. The days after her first piano performance in the restaurant were unlike anything she had expected. Customers began asking for her by name, inquiring if she would play again that evening. Some brought friends, curious to witness the server who had astonished everyone with her music. The atmosphere in the restaurant had shifted subtly. Where once she had moved like a shadow, unnoticed and efficient, now she carried herself with quiet confidence. She walked among the tables, greeting customers with genuine warmth, but also with the knowledge that she was no longer just a server. Something more had awakened within her, and it could not be ignored. Her coworkers approached her cautiously at first. A few offered congratulations, some expressed surprise, and others merely nodded, unsure of what to say. They had known her as someone who quietly performed her duties with dedication, never seeking attention or recognition. Now she was different, not in her work ethic, but in the aura she carried. There was a spark in her eyes, a sense of purpose that had been dormant for too long. Even the manager, who had always been practical and focused on efficiency, treated her with newfound respect. He seemed to understand, in a subtle way, that she had found something that went beyond the ordinary flow of the restaurant. That evening, the restaurant was busier than usual. Customers arrived with anticipation, some whispering to each other about the music they hoped to hear. She moved efficiently between tables, taking orders, delivering meals, and making sure drinks were refilled. Yet each step carried a sense of excitement and anticipation she had never felt before. The piano waited in the corner, silent and patient, as if acknowledging that its time had come again. As the night progressed, a quiet moment presented itself. The restaurant had reached a lull, and she approached the piano, her heart pounding with a mix of nerves and excitement. Her hands hovered over the keys, and for a brief instant, she felt the weight of all the years she had spent away from music. She thought of every lesson, every practice session, every performance that had shaped her, and realized that this moment was not just about playing. It was about reclaiming a part of herself that had been neglected. Hidden beneath the layers of responsibility and routine, she began to play softly, allowing the melody to unfold gently. Each note carried emotion. Each chord told a story. The customers, who had remained quiet now, listened intently, some leaning forward, eyes wide, absorbing every sound. She played with a confidence that had grown from experience, practice, and a deep connection to the music within her. The restaurant, filled with the ordinary sounds of clinking dishes and quiet conversation, transformed into a space of beauty and emotion. Her music became a bridge, connecting her world with those around her, allowing them to feel what she felt, to share in the joy and depth of her talent. As she played, she felt memories of the past intertwining with the present. The hours of practice as a child, the small performances in local recitals, the dreams of music that had once seemed distant and unreachably all merged into this moment. Her fingers moved naturally across the keys, each note precise yet filled with feeling. The music carried a story of resilience, of patience, of never letting go of what mattered most. It was not just a performance. It was a declaration of who she was and who she had always been. Customers responded in ways she had not anticipated. Some closed their eyes, letting the music wash over them, while others exchanged smiles, silently acknowledging the beauty of what they were witnessing. A young girl sat at a corner table, staring in awe, clutching her mother's hand. She reminded her of herself years ago, listening to someone play and imagining that one day she too could create something magical. The mother whispered something to her daughter, and the girl nodded, a spark of inspiration in her eyes. It was a reminder that music had the power to inspire, to connect, and to change lives in small, meaningful ways. The melody grew richer, more intricate, moving through crescendos and delicate passages, expressing the full range of human emotion. She felt every note resonate within her, the piano no longer just an instrument but an extension of herself. The audience, though quiet, responded in subtle ways, their attention and presence amplifying the energy in the room. Each chord was a conversation, each phrase a story. She realized that she was not performing for validation, but for connection. For the joy of sharing a part of herself that had waited patiently for this moment, the restaurant seemed to disappear around her. The smells, the lights, the distant hum of the city faded into the background. It was just her, the piano, and the music. Time seemed to stretch, the minutes dissolving into the flow of melody. She played with abandon, allowing herself to feel fully, to express the years of hope, frustration, and longing that had accumulated within her. The music carried her story, unspoken yet deeply understood by those who listened. It was a culmination of her past, a reflection of her present, and a promise of the future. When the last note faded, there was a pause, a breath of silence as the room absorbed the experience. Then, applause erupted, genuine and heartfelt. Customers stood, some clapping softly, others cheering. The young girl at the corner table clapped enthusiastically, her mother smiling proudly. Her co-workers joined in, their expressions a mix of admiration and awe. The manager stepped forward, his eyes reflecting the impact of what had just occurred. She felt a rush of gratitude and accomplishment, realizing that her courage and dedication had created something meaningful, something that would be remembered. Afterward, she returned to her apron, resuming her duties with a calm confidence. The night continued, but the energy in the restaurant had shifted. Conversations were warmer, smiles more genuine, and the customers carried a sense of wonder with them. She served drinks and cleared tables with a lightness in her step, knowing that her life had changed in subtle but profound ways. The piano remained in the corner, silent yet alive, a reminder that beauty and talent can emerge even in the most ordinary places. In the days and weeks that followed, her reputation as a pianist grew quietly. Regulars requested her by name, and some new customers came specifically to hear her play. The restaurant itself benefited from the newfound attention, but more importantly, she had found her own voice again. Music was no longer a forgotten dream. It was a living, breathing part of her life. She embraced opportunities to play whenever she could, balancing her responsibilities with the joy of expressing herself through her talent. She began to reflect on her journey, realizing how far she had come. Life had not been easy, and many obstacles had stood in her way, but she had persevered. She understood that true passion cannot be extinguished, only deferred. The piano had waited for her patiently, as had her own determination and courage. By reclaiming her music, she had also reclaimed a part of herself, gaining confidence, fulfillment, and a renewed sense of purpose. As she walked home one evening after a long shift, the city lights reflecting off the wet pavement, she felt a quiet contentment. She thought about the customers who had listened, the young girl inspired by her playing, the co-workers who had seen her in a new light. Music had given her more than just personal satisfaction. It had created connections, sparked joy, and reminded everyone in the room of the beauty that exists even in unexpected places. She knew there would be challenges ahead, but she also knew that she had discovered a strength within herself that would guide her through anything. Her life continued, blending work and music, responsibility and passion. The restaurant remained a part of her daily routine, but the piano became a source of inspiration and expression. She played with increasing confidence, exploring new melodies, experimenting with rhythms, and sharing her music with others. Each performance was an opportunity to connect, to tell a story, and to celebrate the gift she had long carried within her. Looking back, She realized that serving drinks and playing piano were not contradictory parts of her life. They were intertwined, each giving her perspective and strength. The lessons learned from her job, the patience, the attention to detail, the empathy enriched her music. The joy and fulfillment from her music, in turn, colored the way she approached her work and life. She understood that life's ordinary moments can hold extraordinary potential if one has the courage to embrace them fully. In the end, she found balance and purpose. Music was no longer a distant dream, but a central part of her identity. She had faced fear and doubt, taken a bold step, and shared her talent with the world. The restaurant, the piano, and the people who had witnessed her journey became symbols of resilience, opportunity, and the transformative power of passion. She continued to serve drinks and play music, each day a blend of the practical and the beautiful, the ordinary and the extraordinary, knowing that her story was only just beginning, and that every note she played carried the promise of what she could achieve. Months had passed since the night she first played the piano in the restaurant. Life had settled into a rhythm that was both familiar and new. She still worked her shifts, serving drinks, delivering meals, and keeping the restaurant running smoothly, but the presence of the piano had changed everything. Customers now arrived not just for food, but to experience the music she created. Word had spread, and the quiet server who had been overlooked for so long had become a subtle but powerful presence in the community. She walked into the restaurant that evening feeling a mix of anticipation and calm. The familiar aroma of coffee and baked goods filled the air, comforting her as she tied her apron and prepared for the shift. She glanced at the piano in the corner, its keys polished slightly from frequent use, and smiled. It had become more than an instrument. It was a friend, a companion, a voice for emotions she could not always express in words. She had learned to balance her responsibilities with her passion, and it had brought a new depth to her life. The evening began quietly, the few regular customers settling into their usual spots. She moved efficiently, taking orders and delivering drinks, but her mind kept wandering to the piano. She had been practicing new pieces, experimenting with melodies, and learning to express herself in ways she had not dared before. The piano had opened doors she hadn't imagined existed, and now, each time she approached it, she felt both excitement and reverence. A young woman entered the restaurant, her eyes lighting up as she noticed the piano. "I heard you play here last month," she said, smiling. "I've been looking forward to hearing it again." The server nodded, a quiet thrill running through her. She had grown accustomed to these moments, but they never failed to inspire her. She led the woman to a table and promised a performance soon. Each request reinforced the fact that her music was not just a private joy, but something that could touch the lives of others. As the restaurant filled, she moved seamlessly between her duties, her presence calm and confident. The balance between serving and performing had become natural, each task feeding the other. She noticed small details more keenly than ever: the tilt of a glass, the slight frown of a customer, the way a child's eyes followed her as she moved. These observations helped her serve better, but they also influenced the music she played, infusing it with empathy and subtle understanding of human emotion. During a lull in the evening, she approached the piano once again. Her hands hovered above the keys, and she took a deep breath. She had prepared a new piece, something more complex than she had attempted in the restaurant before. The first note rang out clearly, a gentle introduction to the melody that followed. As her fingers moved across the keys, the music began to take shape, weaving stories of hope, resilience, and quiet joy. It was a reflection of her own journey, each note carrying the weight of past struggles and the lightness of newfound freedom. Customers listened in awe, some pausing their conversations, others sitting silently, absorbed by the sound. The music seemed to lift the restaurant from ordinary to extraordinary, creating a space where emotions could be felt deeply. She played not for recognition but for connection, allowing the melodies to speak the words she could not always articulate. Each chord resonated with life's complexities, its challenges, and its unexpected beauty. She felt the room respond to her in subtle ways: the shift of a body, quiet intake of breath, the small smile of understanding. Music, she realized, was not just about sound. It was about shared human experience.